My name is Joseph. I was born into a big family. My father, Jacob, loved me deeply, maybe too deeply. I was his favorite son, the child of his old age. He showed his love for me by giving me a beautiful coat made of many colors. I still remember the first day I wore it. Everyone's eyes turned toward me. The colors shone in the sunlight like hope itself. We lived in a quiet place surrounded by fields. My brothers and I worked with the sheep. Life was simple. Early mornings, long days, stars at night. Sometimes I laughed with them, but I also felt different. Deep inside, I believed that my life had a special purpose, though I didn't yet understand it. One night I had a dream. In my dream, we were all in the field tying bundles of wheat. My bundle stood tall, and the bundles of my brothers bowed down to mine. When I woke up, I didn't think much. I was young, full of excitement, and I told them. But they didn't smile. Their faces grew dark. "Do you really think you will rule over us?" one said. I didn't know those words would change my life forever. Later I dreamed again. This time the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed down to me. I told my father and my brothers, hoping they would understand that maybe God had a plan. But my father was quiet and my brothers were angry. I could feel the distance growing like a storm between us. Still, I believed my dreams were from God. Sometimes at night I looked at the sky and whispered, "God, what do you want from me? Why me?" Days passed, and the love inside our home began to feel heavy. My brothers looked at me differently. Their eyes were cold, their voices sharp. They laughed among themselves, and I often stood alone. I tried to help, to smile, but the more I did, the more they turned away. I didn't understand. I only had faith. I told myself, maybe God is preparing me for something greater. Maybe this pain has a reason. But I was wrong. The test hadn't even begun. The path that would lead me to the palace started with betrayal. One morning, my father sent me to check on my brothers in the fields far away. I didn't know it would be the last time I'd see my home for many years. As I walked, I felt the wind on my face, and in my heart I still believed God was with me. Even when love turns to hate, even when family turns to strangers, I believe God's dream never dies. The day that changed my life began like any other. My father called me early in the morning. "Joseph," he said, "your brothers are out with the sheep. Go and see if they are well." I smiled and said, "Yes, Father." I didn't know those would be the last words I'd speak to him for many years. As I walked across the hills, I thought of my dreams again. I wondered if they were really from God or just my imagination. I looked at the sky and whispered, "If you are real, Lord, guide me." When I reached the field, my brothers saw me coming. I waved happily, but they didn't wave back. Their eyes were filled with anger. I slowed down, but it was too late. They surrounded me. "Here comes the dreamer," one of them shouted. "Let's see what becomes of his dreams," another said. Before I could speak, they tore off my colorful coat. My heart broke. That coat was more than cloth. It was my father's love. They pushed me, hit me, and threw me into a deep, empty pit. I shouted for help, but they just laughed. The walls were high, and I could see only the sky above me. Dust fell into my hair, and fear filled my chest. I sat in the darkness and whispered, "God, are you still with me? Did you forget me?" But deep inside, a quiet voice told me, "No, this is not your end." Hours passed. Then I heard voices. A group of traders was passing by, men on camels, heading to Egypt. My brothers talked in low voices. Then they pulled me out. I thought maybe they changed their minds. Maybe they wanted to forgive me. But I was wrong. They sold me. I remember the sound of the silver coins falling into their hands. The men tied my hands with rope and led me away. I looked back, hoping one of my brothers would stop them. No one did. As we walked away, I could still see the hills of my home disappearing behind me. My heart broke, but even through my tears I whispered, "God, if you are still with me, I will not stop believing." The journey to Egypt was long and painful. The desert wind burned my skin, the rope cut my wrists, and my feet bled from walking. But inside, something stronger began to grow, faith. I realized that even when people forget you, God never does. Even when you are in a pit, his promise is still alive. That day I lost everything, my home, my freedom, my family. But I didn't lose my hope, because somewhere deep in my soul I still believed. The dream was not over. When I reached Egypt, everything felt strange. The people, the language, the land, all were new to me. I was sold to a man named Potiphar, a captain in Pharaoh's army. His house was large and his eyes were sharp. I was afraid at first, but I told myself, Joseph, you are not alone. God is still with you. So I worked hard. Every morning I cleaned, carried water, and cared for everything I could. I did not complain even when I was tired. I smiled and whispered in my heart, God, I will still trust you. Time passed and Potiphar began to notice me. He saw that everything I touched seemed to succeed. He said, Joseph, you are different. You have wisdom. From today, you will manage my house. That moment I felt peace again. I realized that even in a foreign land, God could lift me up. When others thought I was finished, God was only beginning. But not everyone around me had a good heart. Potiphar's wife began to notice me too, not for my work, but for something wrong. One day, when the house was quiet, she said, Joseph, come with me. I stepped back and said softly, I cannot do this. It would be a sin against God. She grew angry. Every day she tried again, but I refused. I prayed more, I worked more, I stayed away. But one day she grabbed my coat as I ran away. The cloth tore in her hand. That night, I was accused of something I didn't do. Potiphar's eyes were full of hurt and anger. He believed the lie. He shouted, Take him to prison! I was thrown into a dark cell. Chains on my hands, tears on my face. I sat on the cold floor and asked, God, why? I was faithful. I worked hard. I stayed pure. Why am I here again? There was no answer, and only silence. But I remembered my dreams. I remembered that the pit was not my end. Maybe the prison wasn't either. So I prayed again. Even here in this darkness, I will not stop believing. You are my God, my only hope. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. But even in prison, I helped others. I shared food, I listened to their stories, and I spoke hope to them. And soon people began to see something different in me again, the light of faith. Even when the world shuts its doors, God still opens a window. I didn't know it yet, but this prison was the road that would lead me to my destiny. Days passed, then months, then years. I waited in that dark place, but I didn't lose my faith. Every morning I woke up and whispered, God, I know you are still with me. One day, 2 new prisoners arrived, servants from Pharaoh's palace. One was the cupbearer, who served Pharaoh's wine, and the other was the baker, who prepared his bread. They looked worried and weak. I asked them gently, What is wrong? Why are your faces so sad today? They said, We both had strange dreams last night, and there's no one to explain them. I smiled softly and said, Dreams belong to God. Tell me what you saw. The cupbearer spoke first. In my dream, there was a vine with 3 branches. The branches budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup and gave it to him. As he spoke, I felt peace. I said, The 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and give you back your position. His face brightened. Hope returned to his eyes. Then the baker told me his dream. I had 3 baskets of bread on my head, but birds came and ate from them. My heart grew heavy. I said softly, The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will remove your position and you will die. 3 days later, it happened exactly as I said. The cupbearer was restored. The baker was gone. As the cupbearer was leaving the prison, I grabbed his hand and said, Please remember me. Tell Pharaoh about me. I did nothing to deserve this place. He nodded, but when he left, he forgot me. Days passed again. Sometimes I looked at the prison door and thought, maybe today. But no one came. I wanted to give up. I sat on the cold floor and whispered, God, you gave me dreams, but I am still here. Did you forget me? But every time I cried, something stronger spoke inside me. No, Joseph. The promise still lives. Then one day, years later, the guards came running. Pharaoh had a dream, they said. No one can explain it. The cupbearer suddenly remembered me. He told Pharaoh, There is a man in prison who can interpret dreams. And so they brought me before the most powerful man in Egypt. I stood there, a prisoner before a king. Pharaoh said, "I heard you can interpret dreams." I looked at him and said, "I cannot, but God can, and he will give Pharaoh the answer he seeks." In that moment, I felt peace. After years of pain, betrayal, and waiting, I realized something powerful. Faith never dies in darkness. It grows there. I didn't know it yet, but this was the day everything would change. When I stood before Pharaoh, my heart was calm. He said, "I had 2 dreams. In one, 7 fat cows were eaten by 7 thin cows. In another, 7 full heads of grain were swallowed by 7 empty ones. No one can explain it." I listened, and then God gave me understanding. I said, "Both dreams mean the same thing. There will be 7 years of plenty in Egypt, food and harvest everywhere, followed by 7 years of hunger and famine." Pharaoh's eyes widened. He asked, "What should we do?" I said, "Choose a wise man to prepare Egypt during the good years, so there will be food during the hard years." Pharaoh smiled. "Who could be wiser than you? You have the Spirit of God." And that day, the prisoner became a ruler. He gave me a new robe, a golden chain, and a ring with his seal. I was no longer called a slave. I was called governor of Egypt. As I rode through the streets, people bowed. But in my heart, I bowed to God, because I knew this was not my power. This was his promise. Years passed. The famine came just as God said. The world grew hungry, and one day my brothers came from far away to buy food. I saw them from a distance. They didn't recognize me. I had changed. But when I saw them, my heart broke. The same brothers who threw me in the pit were now bowing before me, asking for help. For a moment, I remembered my dream. The bundles of wheat bowing, the stars kneeling. It was all happening before my eyes. I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask, "Why did you hurt me?" But another voice inside said, "Forgive them. This is not revenge. This is redemption." I turned away and wept. My tears were heavy and not of hate but healing. Later I said to them softly, "I am Joseph, the brother you sold into Egypt." They froze in fear, but I smiled through my tears. "Do not be afraid," I said. "You meant to harm me, but God turned it for good, to save many lives." They began to cry too, and I embraced them. It felt like the years of pain were melting away in one moment of mercy. When my father Jacob heard that I was alive, he came to Egypt. When I saw him, I ran and hugged him like a child. We both wept for a long time, not because of what we lost, but because God had restored everything. Now, when I look back on my journey, the pit, the prison, the pain, I see they were all part of the promise. Every tear was a step toward purpose. Every delay was a part of destiny. So if you are waiting, crying, or wondering where God is, remember my story. God doesn't forget. He prepares. He turns pain into power and sorrow into salvation. I am Joseph, once broken, now blessed. And I know now, what was meant to destroy me became the reason I stood strong. Sometimes life takes us through roads we don't understand. People betray us. Dreams fade. Doors close. And we ask, "God, where are you?" But Joseph's story reminds us, God is still writing. When his brothers hated him, God was planning his rise. When he sat in the pit, God was preparing the palace. When he was forgotten in prison, heaven never forgot him. Every tear, every waiting night, every lonely moment was a piece of a greater purpose. You see, pain is not always punishment. Sometimes it's preparation. God uses the dark to shape your light. He uses the silence to build your strength. And when the time is right, everything that was broken becomes a blessing. So if you are in a pit, don't lose hope. If people turn their backs on you, don't stop believing. If you're crying today, know that God sees every tear. Your story is not over. The same God who raised Joseph from the pit to the palace will also lift you up at the perfect time. Keep believing. Keep trusting. Because what others meant for harm, God will turn into your victory.